The cucumber plant in your garden right now might look like the best one you've ever grown. Big leaves, long vines climbing over the fence, new flowers opening every few days. If you walked out this morning and looked at it, you'd probably feel pretty good about it. You might even be telling your neighbor about it. Now picture that same plant in 3 weeks. The bottom leaves are starting to turn yellow, one after another, like a string of lights going out from the ground up. There's a strange white dust on a few of the older leaves, the kind that wasn't there last week. Some of the flowers are falling off before they ever turn into fruit, just dropping into the dirt. And somewhere under all that green, there's probably a cucumber the size of a baseball bat that you didn't even know was there, because it was hiding under 3 layers of leaves the whole time it was growing. And now it's already starting to go soft. This is the part nobody warns you about when you plant a cucumber for the first time, or the 10th time. A cucumber plant usually does not collapse because something attacks it out of nowhere. It collapses because it grew exactly the way you allowed it to grow, wide, low, and crowded. The plant that looks the most impressive in June is often the same plant that starts falling apart in July, not because of one missed watering, one hot afternoon, or one bad week, because the problem was building down low, underneath the leaves. In the part of the plant you only check once, the whole thing already looks wrong from across the yard. And almost every home gardener, when they see it start to slip, makes the exact same move. They feed it more. That instinct makes sense on the surface. The plant looks weak. The leaves are turning. The fruit isn't coming in the way you pictured it back when you planted the seed, so you reach for the fertilizer bag in the shed. Maybe you start watering more too, because yellow leaves usually mean dry soil, right? Maybe you stop at the garden center and pick up a spray because the person behind the counter told you it would help with whatever's going on with those spots. None of that is a bad instinct. It's just aimed at the wrong target. A cucumber plant with yellowing leaves and disappointing fruit usually isn't starving. It's drowning not in water, but in its own growth. Too many leaves stacked on top of each other, blocking the ones underneath from getting any light or air. Too many vines running in every direction along the ground, weaving through each other like they're trying to escape. Too much shade sitting in a spot where there used to be open air and a clear path for a breeze. Feeding a plant like that is a little like turning up the heat in a room that's already packed with people and no open windows. It doesn't fix the crowding. It just adds more material into a space that was already too full. More fertilizer pushes out more soft, leafy growth, exactly the kind of growth that adds shade instead of fruit. More water sitting on already damp soil keeps the base of the plant wet for hours longer than it should be. More vines sprawling across the ground means more leaves touching dirt, more shaded little pockets where moisture never fully dries out, more hidden corners where a problem can sit and spread quietly before you ever notice it. So the plant keeps getting help, and the plant keeps getting worse. By the time most people realize something is actually wrong, the lower third of the plant looks like it belongs to a different species, entirely pale, spotted, collapsing in on itself, while the top of the same plant still looks lush and green enough to convince you everything is fine. This is the trap. You water more, and the soil stays wetter for longer than it should. You feed more, and the plant answers by growing even more leaves you didn't ask for. You spray more, and the spray reaches the leaves you can see, while the real problem keeps quietly building underneath, in the shaded, damp layer you can't even see without getting down on your knees and parting the leaves apart with your hands. None of these responses are wrong on their own. They're just being applied to the wrong layer of the problem. Here's the part that actually explains why this keeps happening, year after year, no matter how many products get tried along the way. A cucumber plant doesn't know the difference between a leaf that's helping it and a leaf that's working against it. Left completely alone, it will keep producing more vines, more side shoots, more leaf surface, for as long as it has the energy to keep doing it. That's simply what the plant is built to do. It isn't being careless. It just doesn't have a plan, because nobody gave it one. The problem is that every one of those extra side vines and extra leaves is pulling from the exact same pool of energy that's supposed to be going into the cucumbers themselves. A short side shoot growing near a developing fruit can genuinely help feed that fruit, but a long, wandering vine heading off in its own direction isn't feeding anything you'll ever eat, it's just feeding itself, using up sugar and energy the plant could have put into the cucumber you actually wanted. At the same time, all that extra leaf material is quietly building the exact environment that mildew and rot are looking for. Crowded leaves block airflow. Blocked airflow traps moisture against the stems and the undersides of the leaves. And moisture that sits there for hours instead of minutes is exactly what gives fungus the window of time it needs to take hold and spread. The lower leaves take the worst of it, every time. They're the most shaded, the closest to wet soil, and almost always the first to start declining. By the time you actually notice the yellowing down there, the damage has usually been quietly building for a couple of weeks already, completely out of sight. So the plant isn't failing because it lacks fertilizer. It's failing because it was never given a shape. Nobody told it where to put its energy, so it just grew outward and downward, the way water runs downhill without anyone telling it to. And crowding follows that kind of growth as surely as gravity follows a hill. This is exactly the problem Japanese-style cucumber training is built to prevent. And it has nothing to do with feeding the plant harder. The method is single-stem training, and the idea is almost insultingly simple. Instead of letting the cucumber decide its own shape, you decide it for the plant. One main stem, trained straight up. Everything else gets managed before it turns into a tangle on the ground. This isn't some secret passed down in hushed tones, and it isn't a mystical trick. It's much closer to the way a vineyard worker trains a grapevine along a wire, or the way a fruit tree gets shaped and pruned every winter so it doesn't turn into a wild thicket. You're not fighting the plant. You're giving it a clear job to do and removing the distractions that keep pulling it off that job. Picture the same cucumber plant, but instead of sprawling across the ground in every direction, it's tied to a single string or trellis, growing straight up like a green pole reaching toward the sky. The base is clean, no low vines resting in the dirt, no leaves sitting in damp soil. The side shoots are short and purposeful instead of long and wild. And because the whole plant has been lifted up off the ground and opened out, air can actually move all the way through it instead of just sliding past the outside. That airflow is the whole point of everything that follows. Here's the part that explains why this actually works. And none of it requires a science degree to understand. A plant trained onto one vertical stem dries out faster after rain or watering, simply because the leaves aren't stacked on top of each other blocking every breath of wind. Faster drying means less time for mildew to settle in and get comfortable. The fruit hangs out in the open instead of hiding under a canopy of leaves, which means you actually see the cucumbers while they're still a reasonable size to pick, instead of stumbling onto a forgotten one the size of a small log 2 weeks later, sitting there gone to seed. And because the plant isn't spending its energy chasing long wandering vines, more of that energy is free to go toward the fruit that's actually developing. A short side shoot growing near a fruit can genuinely help feed it. A long vine running off into open space is, in the plant's own accounting, basically feeding itself instead of feeding you. This does not make the plant invincible. It still needs decent soil, steady water, and a reasonable amount of sun, the same as any cucumber plant. What changes is simpler than that. The plant stops working against itself. The energy has a clearer place to go, and the damp, crowded conditions that often invite disease have far less room to build. Think of two identical cucumber seeds planted on the same day, in the same soil, watered the same amount all summer. One is left to sprawl across the ground however it wants. The other is trained up a single string from the start. By midsummer, the sprawling one has more total leaves, but a lot of those leaves are shading each other, sitting in low light, doing very little useful work while still costing the plant water and energy to maintain. The trained one has fewer leaves overall, but almost every one of them is catching real sunlight and actually contributing. That's the entire advantage. In plain terms, not magic, just better use of the same plant, the same soil, and the same amount of sun. So how does this actually look? Step by step, out in your own garden. It starts early, while the plant is still small, because every part of this is easier to do before the vines get long and tangled than it is to untangle afterward. First, give the plant one clear path upward. As soon as you notice the main stem starting to grow, tie it loosely to a string, a trellis, a stake, or even a section of garden fence. Loosely is the important word here. You want enough slack that the stem can keep growing thicker over the coming weeks without the tie cutting into it. This single step does more to prevent crowding than almost anything else on this list, because it sets the direction for everything that follows. Without it, the plant has no reason to grow upward at all. Second, keep the bottom of the plant clean while it's still young. As small side shoots, early flowers, and tendrils show up low on the stem, near the base, take them off as you go. This feels almost wasteful. The first time you do it, you're removing flowers that might have eventually become cucumbers. But at this early stage, the plant needs to put its energy into building a strong, thick main stem, not into trying to fruit too early down low, where that fruit would struggle in the shade and the dampness anyway. Third, don't go overboard in the other direction. The goal here is never to strip the plant down to a bare green pole with nothing on it. Healthy leaves are the plant's food-making surface. They're literally what's producing the sugar that grows your cucumbers in the first place. You're removing the excess and the early low growth, not stripping the plant bare. If you ever find yourself removing more leaves than you're leaving behind, you've gone past the point this method is asking for. Fourth, once the plant is established and side shoots start appearing further up the stem, let each one grow just a little enough to support a developing fruit and then pinch off the growing tip. This is the step that stops a short, useful side branch from quietly turning into another long, competing vine. One small side shoot can genuinely help feed a nearby cucumber. Left alone, that same shoot will keep extending outward, week after week, and start pulling energy away from the fruit instead of toward it. Fifth, as the season goes on, keep removing yellowing, diseased, or heavily shaded lower leaves, but do it gradually, a few at a time, never in one big pass. This opens up airflow right at the base, where moisture tends to linger the longest, and it clears away the leaves that have already stopped doing useful work for the plant. Use clean tools whenever you do this. A dirty pair of scissors or pruners can carry whatever problem you're trying to remove straight onto your next clean cut. Sixth, when the main stem finally reaches the top of your trellis or stake, usually somewhere around eye level, or a little above it, pinch off the growing tip. This stops the plant from trying to keep climbing out of reach, and it shifts the plant's energy towards supporting the fruit it's already grown, instead of chasing more height it doesn't need. It also means you'll be harvesting at a comfortable height for the rest of the season, instead of bending down into a pile of vines on the ground or reaching up with a ladder. And finally, water the soil, not the leaves. Keep the ground around the base evenly moist, and a layer of mulch around the stem helps hold that moisture steady. Cucumbers don't handle the swing between dry stress one week and soggy stress the next. Very well, they want something consistent. Watering the leaves directly, especially late in the day when they won't dry before nightfall, just adds more moisture sitting on a plant that's already trying its best to stay dry. Now, here's where most people, even after hearing all of this and nodding along, manage to get it wrong. The mistake is almost never the method itself. The mistake is rushing it. People here remove the side shoots and clean up the lower leaves, and decide to do a single big cleanup all at once, taking off most of the plant's leaves in one afternoon because it feels efficient and satisfying. That's a real problem. Strip too much away in one sitting, and you've taken away the very leaves the plant needs to keep producing energy in the first place. A plant that's been stripped too hard doesn't bounce back from that quickly, no matter how good your intentions were. People also tend to reach for the pruners during the worst heat of the day, in the middle of a blazing summer afternoon, simply because that's when they happen to be out in the yard with a free hour. Pruning during extreme heat puts extra stress on a plant that's already working hard just to stay hydrated under that sun. Early morning or evening, when the temperature has eased off, is a kinder time to do this kind of work. And every now and then, somebody hears about cutting into a plant and decides to help it heal with something like an essential oil rubbed onto the fresh cut because it sounds natural and gentle. Skip that entirely. A clean cut, made with a clean tool, heals on its own without any help. Adding oils or home remedies to an open cut is far more likely to cause irritation or invite a problem than to actually help anything. One more honest point worth saying directly, out loud, Instead of just implying it, this method does not make a cucumber plant immune to everything that could possibly go wrong. It won't cure a mildew problem that's already taken hold and spread across half the plant. It won't fix genuinely poor soil, wildly inconsistent watering, or a brutal multi-week heat wave. What it does is remove the specific conditions, the crowding, the trapped moisture, the wasted energy going into vines instead of fruit that cause a large share of these problems to start in the first place. It's prevention, not a miracle cure, and it's worth being honest about that difference. It's also worth saying that a little inconsistency along the way won't ruin everything. Maybe you miss a week of pinching side shoots because life got busy, or a few extra leaves linger longer than they should have before you get around to clearing them. That's not the end of the plant. The goal isn't perfection every single day of the season. It's giving the plant a general direction and checking back in on it regularly enough that the crowding never gets the chance to take over completely. Now, think for a moment about what the modern routine actually costs you over a whole season compared to this. The feed it and spray it approach means you're buying fertilizer through the season, buying a fungicide spray once the spots show up, and maybe buying another product after that one doesn't fully solve the problem either. Each purchase is a reaction to a problem that already exists by the time you notice it, and most of those problems trace back to the very same root cause, a plant that was never given a shape from the start. The single stem approach uses things you probably already have lying around, or can buy once and reuse for years afterward. A length of string, a simple stake or a basic trellis, a pair of clean scissors or pruners, a bag of mulch. That's the entire toolkit, start to finish. There is no recurring purchase chasing the same recurring problem, because with this approach, the plant is less likely to fall into that same crowded pattern season after season. That's really the heart of the difference between these two approaches. Once you strip away everything else around it, one of them keeps buying solutions for a plant that's already struggling and already behind. The other one shapes the plant early enough that it never gets the chance to struggle in that same way to begin with. And that idea is worth sitting with for a second longer, because it reaches a little further than just cucumbers. A lot of problems in a garden, and honestly, a lot of problems anywhere in a household don't show up because something is missing. They show up because something was allowed to grow unchecked for too long, quietly, until it became an obstacle all on its own. The cucumber plant didn't fail because it needed more fertilizer, more water, or one more spray. It failed because nobody gave it direction early enough in the season. And by the time the problem was visible from across the yard, it had already been building underneath the leaves for weeks. The fix was never about adding something new to the routine. It was about removing the parts that were quietly working against the plant the whole time and giving the rest of it one clear, open path to grow along. It's a strange thing to learn from a vegetable garden, but it tends to hold up almost everywhere else too. The pile of mail that takes over a kitchen counter didn't appear overnight. The garage that's impossible to park in didn't get that way in a single weekend. Most of the things that eventually feel overwhelming got there the same way that cucumber plant did, a little bit of unchecked growth, left alone for just slightly too long until the cleanup felt bigger than it ever needed to be. That's the whole idea sitting underneath training a cucumber onto one clean stem. Not more leaves, better placed leaves, not more feeding, better timing. A plant that's guided early in the season usually doesn't need to be rescued later in it, and by the time next season rolls around, setting that trellis up on the very first day, instead of the day you finally notice the yellowing creeping up from the bottom, is the real difference between a plant you manage with a little patience and a plant that manages to surprise you every single year.